Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first ever show of Sci-Fi Breakdown. I'm student Dr. Ben. You all probably know me and my awesome the Phi to my Psi SR. How you doing,
Woo!
bud?
I am great, Ben. It is always so exciting to be hanging out with you and talking and learning about the body and the brain and stuff. There are so many things I am realizing I have no idea about this meat sack I walk around in regularly. So it's nice to hang out and learn that and we're gonna bring a little bit of logic-y stuff, philosophical isms. I'm pretty sure those are the technical terms, so we'll
Those
figure
are
it out.
absolutely the words. And before we get into kind of the meat of the show, because you all are probably wondering, what the fuck are we doing here? Why
Mhm.
do we have a show on this? And we'll get to that. But first of all, this particular episode is part of a marathon stream for Lavender Lady, who needs a kidney. So the funds are going towards some of her medical expenses, also towards her after surgery care because she needs people to take care of her for a few months after the surgery. And in order to even get on the transplant list, we have to guarantee that she has the system in place. So if you are able to donate, I'm going to put a link. There's a link in the description, but I know y'all don't read that. So I'm going to put it in the side chat.
You lazy
And if you're
bums.
able to, please do. We love Lavender Lady. She is a great person, great member of the community, and we love her to pieces. So
Give me just a second, Ben. My work's calling back, man. I'll be right back.
yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, SR's gonna be popping in and out because as work stuffs. Um, But anyway, I'm gonna talk a little bit of about why we started this show and kind of what we're doing here. So I was talking with SR, and we started talking about philosophy and science and things. And many of you know that both of us show our faces a lot on these call-in shows, such as The Perspective on Ethan's channel. We're also found in the ACA shows, and then I've been on the line as well recently. And there are certain arguments brought up in these call-in shows, or even in chats on the internet of people who are religious and or are making truth claims that they can't really um, demonstrate. And of course, we have our scripts of how people like to respond to these. And my thought was, because I thought that I would never ever be good at call-in shows. I was like, this is not something that I'm good at, because I thought that you had to know philosophy. Like I thought you had to be a good philosopher in order to have these discussions with people. And it turns out that's not the case at all. And so many of us have different perspectives on how you can demonstrate truth and how you can go about evaluating these claims. So, yeah, philosophy is a great way to look at truth claims and to ask questions, but it's not the only way. And I come from a scientific background. And so SR and I have had conversations kind of behind the scenes about these topics, and mostly about how when we're communicating with people, we don't often recognize that someone else might be coming from a different perspective and seeing the
Mhm.
problem differently. And so we might have a certain expectation of their argument, and they might not have the same expectations. And learning how we can communicate better and also understand that maybe we're missing the conversation a little bit.
And there is a lot of value in trying to understand how other people approach issues and problems in life. And when you really start to break down what it is that drives a person to consider certain aspects, maybe more heavily than others, it is really, really interesting how all of a sudden you can just click a lot more. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that you instantly start seeing eye to eye with each other and start holding hands and skipping through the fields together, but you get to a place where those difficult conversations seem to be a heck of a lot easier. And I think that's what we all want, most of the time. We want to be able to challenge each other and learn, but do it in a way where we don't constantly have to be yelling and fighting each other. Ben is trained in the martial of arts. I have heard,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
we will not ever be getting into an actual physical fight just because I am deathly terrified. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. So
Yeah, and we have a couple topics that we're going to get into that have some very meaty discussion to them.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
but I mean, this always ends up being very interesting. Um, I see a lot of people like when they start a debate with a certain topic, sometimes like the script leads you to go to places like demanding, say, a syllogism
mhm.
from somebody. And
Yeah,
if someone's not prepared to offer up a
yeah,
syllogism, it doesn't
yeah.
necessarily mean that they can't demonstrate their point. It just might mean that their way of getting there might be different. And taking that into consideration when we talk to people, but what we're trying to do, we're going to take some of these specific arguments as if like we're going to like pretend that somebody is calling into our show or talking to us in person and making a claim, and then SR and I are going to take our unique perspectives to this and figure out how we would approach this type of conversation, and then see if there's anything, because something else that we don't really consider too is that you might be talking with somebody who is prepared to go down your line of thinking, and you might not. Like if if I'm talking to SR about the same issue, um, I can't necessarily think that we're going to go in a certain statistics direction when I know SR is not ready to go there. So maybe there's a time when I need to learn how to take on a different style because my style is not going to reach that person and that's not going to be effective. So and it's kind of fun too, I think, because we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and I think
Right.
you often see these people on the call-in shows, and I know I was somebody like this too. Like, wow, like I can never be as good as them. I don't like know these kinds of arguments. But like that person is arguing from their strength. Like
Mhm.
they're using their methods that they've used over and over and over again. They're comfortable, and we don't see these people stepping out, like having to step outside their comfort zone and like switch to a totally different perspective on it often. So you all get to watch us fumble a little bit maybe and trying to communicate in a way that we don't normally, because I know if I tried to be a philosopher, it's going to be a train wreck. And I hope you all get to see that.
Yeah, and it's and everyone out there should be thanking somebody or something or whatever that I'm not a doctor because that would be terrible. Um, but yeah, for all of us on the philosophy side, for all of us that really do like to spend 30 minutes breaking down, a single word or concept or something and really, delving into just different schools of thought and just reading book after book after book and just, really diving into all of that and making sure that our logic is on point. We have to remember that there is a whole bunch of people out there that just have never done that. And that doesn't make us better. It doesn't make them dumber. It's not like that at all. There are things that some of us are able to travel in circles and learn things. There are experiences that others of us have that we don't have, and it's valuable. It is really, really good that somebody that is learning medicine spends a long time learning about medicine and doesn't have the freaking time to read 42 books written 500 years ago, about syllogisms. That's
Mhm.
good because we need those people to learn stuff. So, um, Yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm so happy to be here doing this with you, Ben.
Yeah.
We have some really really cool things, I think, in the future. I don't want to
Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
anybody, give them away, but
Mhm.
we got a couple of good ones tonight. What are we doing? What are we doing here? What do we got going for the people?
Okay. So the first argument, first of all, I do want to read some. We have some syllogisms in the chat right now.
Ooh,
So
already.
we have premise one: a good argument should be capable of being expressed as a syllogism.
Ooh,
Premise two: you haven't expressed your argument as a syllogism. Conclusion: your argument is therefore not good.
that is
There you go.
that is a nice on the fly, but they do follow up with would be a
With
logical fallacy. Yeah, and I agree. I agree.
yes.
There are some flaws, but again, on the fly, Grimbeard, I give you props. That's good.
We have
That's
another one from Atheist Edge.
all
So
right.
Jim has one. Premise one: tide goes in, tide goes out.
Mm.
Conclusion: you can't explain that.
I mean, well, it was a good run. We had fun. We appreciate everybody for joining us, and we'll pack it up. You know.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So the argument we're gonna delve into first. So let's say we have a caller. We are on some call-in show.
Mhm.
Somebody calls in, and they say that they believe that we all have souls. Where do we go from here? How do we
Whew.
address something like this?
Yeah. This is something that, you know, this is something that comes up a lot of times when we're having chats with believers, whether they're religious or just believing in supernatural things. And so for this one, beforehand, I put together just the quick syllogism here. This is a simple construction. You know, those out there that are into philosophy have probably heard the whole Socrates is a man, men are mortal, Socrates mortal. So this one we do a play on that, and it's so all humans have souls. Ben is a human. Ben has a soul. Done and done. We logicked it up. We got it. We got it all correct, right? Except there are some problems here, right? I mean, and one of them for sure is just whether or not we accept the premise about, you know, the soul in and of itself. And what would we do for that? I mean, where would we how would we look for a soul? That's not something we can do philosophically, right?
No,
Could
I
we
don't think so.
could we put people in an MRI? Do you feel like an MRI would be
No, no,
right?
I don't think so. And I have so many thoughts. I want to let you go on your philosophy route, but also we do have a question that is very important, and I did want to get to this. What is a soul? We need some
Mhm.
definitions here. If we're gonna go into any
It's a
discussion, we
great
need to
place
make
to
sure we're talking
start.
about the same thing. So, how are we defining the soul?
Right.
So, I mean, what from certain callers, what have you heard as some? Because we can play around with some a variety of
Mhm.
definitions since this is a hypothetical.
Well,
So what do you want to go with?
oftentimes, whenever I hear people say the the soul is generally the collection of characteristics that defines an individual. I mean, that's kind of one of the vaguest ways I could say it. It's oftentimes immaterial, which I know that's we got some shaky ground there, people, but just walk with us, just go with us here. Um, but a lot of times it's, you know, the collection of experiences that are you and your memories and so forth. So like your hand is part of you, but like you could lose one of your hands and you'd still be like you. But the soul is just like the purest of pure essences that is you. Which again, I understand, y'all. We're on some shaky ground here. I'm not a believer in this thing. We're trying to be as charitable as possible. We're trying to really take the argument for what it is. And if we're saying, hey, the core essence, the overall collection of your emotions and thoughts and experiences and so forth. I think that's probably one of the best ways I've ever heard it defined. What do you think? What do you think about that? Do you think that's something we could work with or
Yeah. Yeah, and I do want to establish something else here. Does consciousness play a role in the soul? Are we going to add that to this?
Yeah, I think it's valuable to do that for sure. Yeah, I think I didn't say the word explicitly, but yeah, I think consciousness is important to have in there. That kind of rolls in with the whole experiences and emotions and thoughts and feels and all that good stuff. But um yeah, it's hard, and that's, kind of why I don't accept it, right? I haven't had a great coherent definition. Um but that's probably the best one I've ever heard. So,
Okay. So, SR and I behind the scenes have been talking a little bit about kind of how our two perspectives are basically they're two halves, like two sides of the same coin. And we both fulfill a very important role in demonstrating truth. So, SR had said that, um, because every argument, you need to make sure that it is valid and sound,
mhm.
right? So I don't want to speak for you because this was something that you made a point of. So I want you to kind of share what you said about that.
Yeah, the validity side is basically where we sit when it comes to philosophy. I mean, the whole point of us sitting around and making sure that we're not falling prey to these fallacies, making sure that our conclusion is, not already in the premises, that's circular, or, we're not just pulling something out of nowhere when we get to the conclusion. We have to have it in the premises, otherwise we can't get to it. It's just totally non sequitur. Um, Making sure that we're not discounting any other options, right? Um, but the problem is, a lot of times when we play in this realm of philosophy all the time, we forget that super, super critical soundness component. And the soundness component is not us sitting around and chatting about X's and Y's and P of Q's and all of these things. No, it's us getting out there, getting in the lab, testing things, making sure that when we say the word human, right? So Ben is a human. Okay. Well, what the hell's a human? What's a person? What is that? And it's like, well, okay, we know at least one thing. We know that it's not a tin can. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that helps us a little bit. That's something. Well, how do we know that? Well, we go out there and we look at a person and we look at a tin can and we go, okay, well, there's something different there. There's something about this can that I'm liking. But um the validity aspect, a lot of times I think is one of the ones that's easier to do. Um Again, it's not that everybody sits around all day and just plays with philosophical arguments all the time, but if you do that, if you do sit around for just a little bit, and you watch some cool YouTubers out there, or you read through, a lecture or two or whatever, you can get a lot of these structural problems, which is all validity is working with. But again, at the end of the day, the valid argument that we gave earlier, if we don't have something concrete to point to indicate that, a Ben exists, right? We got to show Ben's real first off. Then we got to show humans are a thing. Now we need to talk about what the souls are. Now we need to have some kind of demonstration, some kind of evidence for that. Because otherwise you know, we're just making up words and telling each other that they correspond to things. That's how we figure out whether or not what we're talking about matters. And that's the super valuable side that scientists are doing, guys. This is there's so much about philosophical argumentation that relies on us just waking up every day and just going outside and looking at stuff and testing stuff. So let's remember in our armchairs as a smarty pants is. Let's remember we need to take a seat every now and then and just listen to what our medical and scientific friends are doing. So,
And I think there's something that I say a lot, that like you can't just do a logic in your brain and
mhm,
mean that it's reality. It's like when we say that truth is what comports with reality, you have to actually demonstrate that it is
right.
reality. And I think people miss out on how we get to those conclusions in science because there's
Mhm,
a process. And a lot of this has to do with statistics. And I'm proud this show is going to be a lot of me talking stats because I
good.
think stats is one of the most critical tools that we can use to evaluate truth because it tells us whether or not something can be coincidental or if it actually is related. And I think that's super, super, super important. So if you just observe something one time, is that gonna necessarily be true of every other time something happens?
Mhm,
No, you have to have enough of a sample size. You have to be able to use statistics to demonstrate things. And I think we had a call on Talk Heathen last week that really I love the example that I end up using because gravity is something it's demonstrable. Gravity is demonstrable. It's not something that we just decided to name the
right.
phenomenon of things falling. There's actual like it's related to mass, and we can calculate that out. But the point is, on Earth, if I drop something like 1,000 times, it's gonna fall every single time. So you could infer that it is related. That every time I drop something, it's gonna fall. But think about the bias in that. If I took just that data, all that told me is that under my specific circumstances, that happened. Because what if I take that same thing that I dropped into outer space and I replicated the study and I dropped that item 1,000 more times? If I only isolated that side, then I would conclude that it's never going to fall. So variables are very important. And both of those, if I made either conclusion, I have to add on to like what my claim is because otherwise it's false. If I say every single time, if I drop my phone every single time, 100% of the time, it's going to fall, that would be false because that's only true under these specific circumstances with these variables being consistent. I am on planet Earth. Um, I have a phone that weighs a certain amount. It's going to fall at a certain rate because of that. But I go in outer space, it's not going to fall. So I can make the claim that on Earth, under these circumstances, it will fall 100% of the time. That would be true. That would be sound. But if I leave off that context, it's not universally true anymore.
Yeah. And it's important to remember about when we go out to test things, right? Not only do we have to be specific about what we're talking about, right? Because we can, yeah, exactly like you said. Well, every time I drop the phone, it falls. Well, where are you dropping that phone? Because that can change depending on just something as simple as that. The other thing that we have to remember to do is we have to remember not to be fitting the data to our conclusion, right?
Mhm.
If we take a guess beforehand and we get it right, that's good. That doesn't necessarily indicate we know what the heck we're talking about though, right? Because we can all make guesses and get stuff right. And that's where you were talking about making sure that you have an adequate amount of data because yeah, you drop the phone once, it falls, and then you just conclude, oh, every time you drop something, it's gonna fall towards Earth. Well, hang on. Hang
Yeah.
on. Do you know about
Ollie
helium balloons?
Yeah, Ollie makes a great point. Like if you drop a helium balloon, it's not going to fall.
Yeah.
So you have to be specific about context, and the variables really do matter. So when we're applying this to a soul, I mean, we can argue the philosophy of what is a soul, like
Mhm,
what is a person, like what is
mhm.
consciousness, all we want. But what use is that going to have if we can't demonstrate it? And
Yeah.
especially it ends up being a very complicated argument when you apply science to it, because I was thinking about how I would design a study to demonstrate or not demonstrate a soul, and it's very, very, very difficult. Because part of it being that everybody like is included in this, all humans, from at least from what I can tell, is the argument that all humans have a soul. And some people make arguments about animals, plants, and all that, but we'll
Yeah,
stick with
let's
the
just
humans for
stick to
now.
people. Yeah,
We're
yeah.
gonna stick to people. But having something that supposedly interacts with the physical world, but
Mhm,
isn't of the physical world, it should
mhm.
be, if it is there, should be demonstrable, because it is influencing the physical world. It is doing
Right.
something. So you can't say it's not, it's of this other dimension, because you are claiming that it is interacting with reality.
Now, hang on. I gotta ask. So you have memories, right? You did
Yes.
things weeks ago,
Yes.
months ago.
Mhm.
I did too, and I remember those things. Ben, where are memories? Aren't memories immaterial?
Um, I don't know if, I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I guess they would be immaterial, but they still interact with reality,
And we
and we
can
can
show
demonstrate it.
neurons. Yeah, we can show. I know at least enough to say that we can show changes in physical like shape and size of neurons related to um, various tests that we do with memory. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, like, okay, maybe my character, my personality isn't a single cell that sits at this spot on your brain somewhere, but there are things that we can do, right? We know that
Mhm.
we can touch stuff and say, "Oh, look what it does. Look how it interacts with your memory." This is like anesthesia and so forth can play
Mhm.
with people's memory. If we can give people drugs and it changes something like that, well, we know there's a physical component because we just showed it.
Here we
Um,
go. Here we go. They are patterns of
yeah,
weighted neural connections.
see, gosh, I get one right every now and then.
So, and something with demonstrating this, is with the brain or with anything, with the body that we're going to demonstrate. We typically can do it by kind of like a knockout phenomenon, where say we have, everybody has, I might not even use a brain as an example, pick something pretty simple, um, but a heart. We'll go with the heart. All of us that are alive have a heart, and we know universally, um, with okay, I'm gonna be careful here, because excluding exceptions such as ECMO machines, because we know we can use technology to function as a heart, but that's a whole other
Yeah, but
side
it
of the
kind of it
conversation.
kind of just
But it does
adds
the same.
weight to
It
what
adds
you're
it does
saying.
the same function. So it
Yeah.
basically, even if we added technology to it, it is serving as a heart. So
Right.
all of us that have a heart, if we take out the heart, people don't survive. We
Yeah.
know that blood does not circulate without a heart. So if we do that over and over and over and over and over and over again, and we reach a certain n value, being our sample size, which would be incredibly high here for, um, I mean, we haven't done a specific test on all of humanity, but let's say I
Yeah.
took
We did a
a
couple.
thousand people. I took 1,000
Yeah.
people, and I removed half the people's hearts, which is not ethical. We could not ever do a study like this, because
Yeah.
that is unethical.
Mm.
But hypothetically, if I took 500 of those people, left their heart in, and I took the other 500 people and took their heart out, those 500 people without the heart would not have their blood circulating. So we can statistically calculate out, because that we would get a normal distribution, theoretically, although not really, because it's more of a binary thing. Um, you can demonstrate causality, that the heart was the thing pumping the blood. You can draw that connection because you would also have to use stats. So you do your statistical calculations. You would determine whether or not this is coincidental, because we have to make sure that it wasn't by chance that this happened. But in this case, if we did a study like that with the heart, we would show that it is statistically significant that the having a heart relates to blood circulation. But again, we're still not there. Even there, we're still not there with demonstrating that the heart like does this in a certain way. We don't know the benefits. We don't know much. All we know is that there is a connection.
Right.
We don't know what the connection is. That's all we've demonstrated with our statistics and determining the p-value or the t-score or the z-score.
Still way more than we have for the soul, though.
So then the next step, we'd have to do further studies to demonstrate that what the relationship is. I'm going to argue we would not get bimodal distribution, because this has to be a binary, because if you don't, with having a small standard deviation, it wouldn't be bimodal because you're not going to have a spectrum on it.
I was going to say, I think the people without the hearts would just all die. I mean,
yeah,
but we have, I mean, just as a terrible fact of history, we actually have done stuff like this, people. We did.
we have.
It was a long, long, long time ago. We're talking like 1400s, 1500s in Europe. But yes, we have taken hearts out of people as they were still alive. Like, we have unethically squished people's heads and seen what it does to them. We've also, unfortunately, had terrible accidents over the years where people have, I mean, the most famous, of course, is the guy that had the rod, straight through his skull, and it just completely changed his personality. We've cut people's, corpus callosum, straight down the center. And these things absolutely alter all of those things. When we were constructing earlier, what the heck is a soul? When we were doing that, all of these things so far, we can play with them by doing these tests that Ben's talking about. Again, he's right. Sure, okay, let's put our philosophy hat back on. Maybe it doesn't exactly tell us 100% that the heart is the thing pumping but it does seem to show an extremely strong correlation between the two. And that is important. We need that. If we don't have that soundness we're just not there.
Yeah, and with the soul, how would we get a control group? Because we need to be able to compare things. We have to compare.
Yeah.
If we're going to demonstrate that a soul does certain things,
Mhm.
we have to demonstrate that there is the connection. So in order to do that, we have to have at least more than one group. So how would we isolate a control group?
We would need people without souls, right? We would need, in that scenario, we would have to be positive, hey, these 5 people right here are soulless. They are definitely. Yeah, that's a good thought.
Again, a claim.
Yeah. Well, right. And see, and that what's so funny is just something like that, just Ben and I just, chatting and working this stuff out here, that just sparked something in my head that I had never really thought of it like that before. Again, the way I look at it is I go through this whole coherency thing. I go through this whole, ontological, epistemological, blah, 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 blah. And Ben just sits down and he says, well, hang on a second. How would we even do a test like this? How would we put this in the lab? And that's what's important about trying to look at these types of claims and these types of arguments from both sides. Because something as simple as that, as just saying, well, to do a real test, we'd need a control group that would require them to not have souls, which is oh, wait, but we've all got a soul in this scenario. How would we do that? Well, if anybody knows, your soul. If anybody has any confident, soulless friends, if anybody has sold their soul to the devil and they definitely don't have it, give us a call. We're going to work on an experiment.
But yeah, because other things with the brain, like we can figure out what dopamine does
Mhm.
by knocking out dopamine. Like
Yep.
if someone does not have dopamine, what happens? We can do that. It's not nice. We often do these on animals first because they're
Oh,
not very nice things to
yeah.
do. But we can look at that. We can have a control group of like, well, I mean, in this case, the control group would be the people with the dopamine, and people without the dopamine um, would be more of the experimental group. But either way, you have to have um, you have to have your variables isolated in such a way that you can look at them. Um, but I'm learning so much here from SR as well on the from the philosophy side because I know I don't think I would be able to function very well in those philosophical conversations about the soul. Like I often don't know where to go with people on that. On like
It's hard.
logically, where do we stand on this logically?
Again, I think the biggest thing, the shakiest ground for me when it comes to the soul is just a unified, coherent understanding of what it is. We need to have, look, again, I love the big smarty smart words. I love them. I do it. I love to do it. I sit down with people and just go back and forth as long as we can. But the point of doing that sometimes is because myself and this other person, we're already at the point where we're saying, okay, look, we know how colloquially people use this term. And then we know how, like, the real hardcore 20 years studying into philosophy people use this term. And we're using that term, but we want to add this other really minute nuance to this concept. Well, I'm not even sure we have a unified um colloquial usage. I don't know that we have the soul codified in such a manner where two people can just show up on the street and say soul and really know at all what the other person is talking about. And so for me, that's the first place I want to push back on. If I say car, like if Ben and I had never met each other and we're just standing out in a parking lot and I just go, "Hey man, are you looking for your car?" Like, I don't have to explain car. We could have a real nuanced definition of what a car is. And sure, I know people are going to say, "Well, what about this type of car? And what about that?" Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we get the picture. It's this boxy thing. You sit inside of it. It's got like wheels, it goes vroom.
Mhm.
Pretty simple. But if we're trying to have a conversation where the main point of contention, we don't even have an understanding of what that is. We're not even on the same playing field. Well, that's so difficult for us to move any further. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when it comes to setting up an actual scientific experiment, why would it be so difficult to do that for the soul? And part of the reason is, well, gosh, we don't know what the heck we're talking about. If it's emotions, if part of the soul is emotions, well, I mean, we know about this. We know about like
We
chemicals in
do.
the brain and stuff.
We do. Yeah.
Okay, so take that out. Take that out. Okay, well, memories, we already took care of that earlier. Okay, so take that out. Well, what about the essence of your personality? What is that? Have we defined anything right there? We said soul first, and then we said okay. And then we said, well, what is it? It's the essence of your personality. Well, what is that? I don't feel like we've made any headway here. Um, if we just don't know what the heck we're talking about, people. I mean, how do we use it in a syllogism? How do we set up a scientific experiment to figure out what it is and where it is?
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate real quick. I'm gonna
Let's do it.
pretend to be our hypothetical caller.
Let's do it.
So this caller says, yes, we know about the science of memory,
Mm-hmm.
and personality.
Okay.
So if I redefine soul to mean this scientific basis for like if I use soul to mean memories and emotions and personality and it's demonstrated by science, I've demonstrated a soul because I've defined a soul as that.
Yeah.
What are they doing here with this argument? That's a problem.
Yeah, they're equivocating basically, and they're adding on needless baggage to a concept that we understand. There's no reason to add. We know we know what emotions are. Again, we're pretty smart about this, guys. We've been doing this for a really, really long time. There are a lot of other people out there that have been learning and thinking about this stuff. Ben's not the only doctor, or soon to be full doctor, that's out there. There are a lot of people, and they've been studying this for a while. We so if you're just going to add on top of that and say, hey, all of this information that we have about, the regulation of hormones in the body, and, what the brain does when it synthesizes these different chemicals and so forth. Like, if you're going to add on to that another term that then also has all this extra stuff on it, I mean, why? You're just muddying up the waters for no reason. And if you're just saying, oh well, like when people say, well, God is love, it's like, well, why say that? Why not just let love be love? It's like, we've got a word for it. It's like, well,
Mhm.
love isn't perfectly defined. It's like, yeah, but God is less defined, soul is less defined. And we know what memories are. We're pretty good about memories. Why call it something else, right? We know what this thing is, with the 5 fingers and the on the end of the wrist and stuff. Why also call it a foot or a sock or a
Yeah.
chair? Like, no,
Mhm.
it's a hand. And that's okay. That's okay that we use that terminology. We've got good reason to use it. And if we realize we keep having this issue where every time we're talking about something, every time we bring up soul and we try to sit down and define it, we realize that we're struggling to really get those edges defined. There might be a good reason why that's the case. It might
Yeah,
be
it,
might not be
it
there.
it's like this one argument that I had in my someone put this in my comment section on my ivermectin video. I got a lot of fun, fallacious
Yeah.
arguments in the
Yeah.
comment section of my ivermectin video. So if you want some fun, bad examples of logic, that's a
Mhm.
great place to go. It's a mess, but this person was using the equivocation fallacy and saying that the definition of a parasite is something that benefits from doing damage to something else.
Yeah, I saw that.
And yeah, so therefore, a virus is a parasite. So therefore, ivermectin, being an anti-parasitic,
Uh,
should treat COVID.
uh-huh.
And
Okay.
that's where they went with this.
Uh-huh.
Like, but just because you played a word game
Right.
and you made the words fit does not change the reality that ivermectin does not work on viruses, right?
Right. And that's where the whole, like, again, we can sit down in our armchairs, and we can think about it all day long. We can read all the books and we can know all the words. Um but we have to make sure that what we're saying actually corresponds to reality, people. Like, you can't go out there and say, well, all all cars are chickens and all chickens have 14 legs, therefore all cars have 14 legs. It's like, wait, no, none of that. I mean, I guess structurally you're good, but yeah, it doesn't have any application in the real world, and it makes things more difficult for us to figure out what's going on. Earlier, like we were talking about, like, an MRI. Like, would we put somebody in an MRI to figure out a soul? Would we take their blood? Would we what could we do to figure this out, because these are things we can do to figure out these other things that we're talking about, these aspects of what a lot of times people attribute a soul to. We say, well, it's those feelings you get when you see a sunrise. Well, no, it isn't. We know about dopamine and serotonin and
Yeah.
oxytocin and stuff. So what is it? What's the actual relation of the smarty smart thinky words that we're putting together, and the physical stuff in front of us? Where is that? And again, if we keep having this difficulty time and time and time and time again, it it may be a good indication. It's just not there. It's just
Well, and again, if the soul is something that is causing something to happen in the physical world, shouldn't we be able to, if we removed the soul,
Mhm.
that thing would not happen? Like we should be able to have some way to access this thing if it is having an influence.
This is like when you were talking about, you did that video on reflexology about,
Yeah.
well, yeah, if you're telling me that squeezing my big toe does this to my heart or whatever it is, well, we would see that, right? We could do that. It'd be simple. We just squeeze the big toe, and then we watch somebody's heart like have trouble or get better or whatever the hell, like pump faster, pump slower, whatever. But
Mhm.
that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Now that in and of itself, again, hey, I get it, guys. That in and of itself is not indication that reflexology doesn't work. The good news is we've done even more things than just that. We don't just play this little piggy went to the market with people and just move on with our day. But yeah, we need to be able to show this cause and effect thing. We have to be able to explain why your arm raises when certain muscles contract, right? We can do that with stuff.
Mhm.
And if somebody has a good idea for a test for a soul, I mean, awesome. There's all kinds of universities and
Mhm.
hospitals and clinics and all kinds of places that we could go, but it just doesn't seem like we can ever get down to it, you know?
So here's where I think you'd have to go with the argument. And that this actually goes into both of our perspectives a little bit because I'm going to play a little bit of a medicine game here with this.
Mm,
Um so in medicine there are certain times where we have a diagnosis of exclusion. So if you rule out everything else,
mhm,
the assumption is that the remaining things is correct. And this is logically fallacious.
mhm.
Like it's making an assumption that you can't necessarily make. We do it in medicine because it's not useful in medicine to be like, well, there could be some random disease that we don't have never heard of.
Sure.
That like, sure, we can hypothesize that there are other processes we don't know about, but is that useful? Is that useful for me in the moment,
No.
medically speaking, when I need to intervene in some way to help somebody? You have to make that assumption somewhere so that you can at least do a trial of a therapy, see if something works. Examples of this are like sarcoidosis is often a diagnosis of exclusion simply because you can't. It's really difficult to demonstrate sarcoid. Certain encephalopathies, like certain very specific autoimmune encephalopathies, are diagnoses of exclusion because there isn't a test yet that we can use to demonstrate it. But what we can do is knowing that that disease is a thing, we can use the other tests, we can go into the other possibilities and rule them out. Oh, and
Yeah, I'm trying
IBS.
to.
IBS is probably the most common example of this because IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is so common, very, very common. But what we have to do is we have to rule out things like IBD, which is often confused with IBS, but IBD is an autoimmune condition of the intestines. So either ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. We have to rule those out. We can test for those. We can do colonoscopy. We can do certain stool studies for enzymes that'll tell us if you're having these issues. We can find antibodies. If we don't find those things, we can pretty safely rule out that diagnosis, because statistically, we see a likelihood that you'd be positive for these tests if you had that. So we rule that out. We'd also have to rule out things like infectious enterocolitis. We'd have to rule out diverticulitis. There's a whole list of things that we need to rule out before we got to a diagnosis of IBS. But we still get there, even though there's not really anything that's like, hey, we can't really prove IBS, but we do. So I think this is the way that we would have to approach the soul with.
Well, let me clarify real quick, because I'm just making sure I'm thinking about this right. So basically what you're saying is, in that scenario, which again, yes, for all us philosophy nerds out there, yeah, that's what people sometimes call the Holmesian fallacy, or where you rule out everything else, so whatever's remaining has to be it. Technically, problem philosophy wise, but what you're saying is, a patient comes in presenting certain symptoms, right? Like they're not breathing, or they're not conscious, or they have pain in the abdomen, or whatever the heck it is. And because they are exhibiting these symptoms, we say, here's the total list of all the medical things we have really good study on, and we're pretty smart and knowledgeable on. It definitely can't be this one, because that requires the person to have gone to, the jungles of South Africa recently, and they haven't done that, right? We know it's not this virus. We know it's not this type of fungal infection, because they were nowhere near it. That's basically what you're saying when it comes to like ruling it out?
And like, if I were a philosopher, I could approach this and say, well, technically, there's a non-zero probability that it could be this thing.
Sure.
Well, yeah, sure. There's always a non-zero probability, but is that useful to me? Is this patient going to get better because I was like, well, there's a non-zero probability that it could be all of these diseases, and that you're also dying of cancer right now.
Yeah.
But that's not useful, because the point is, I need to step in and do something. So I get down to this diagnosis of exclusion, and I can treat their IBS with dietary modification, and potentially it will help them, potentially it won't. But in ruling out the other things, I didn't completely 100% forever rule them out, but I decreased the likelihood of it being that. So I can pretty confidently make a decision for this person. The question is, though, with the soul, even if we were to approach it like a diagnosis of exclusion, we've popped positive on some of the tests that we were using to try to narrow it down to, because in order to get to a diagnosis of exclusion, you actually have to exclude the other things. And we haven't done that. We've actually demonstrated that those other things are correct.
Right. We're not ruling anything out, unfortunately. We're kind of confirming that they are there, but it shrinks that space that we can put the soul into. When we learn more about the brain, well, it's not soul anymore, it's brain. It's just this part of the brain. Oh no, hang on a second, we just found out this part of the stomach is really important. Or, oh my gosh, did you know about this thing in your chest cavity? Like, oh no, we didn't know about that 10 years ago, and now we do. And because we know about that, holy crap, that answers a lot of these questions that we were attributing to something that, again, honestly, we just don't have a great definition of. Like, I guess we could, really trying to give the devil his due here, Ben, but we could say, okay, maybe, what is a heart? Like there's
Yeah.
maybe some fuzziness around it. But again, there are some really clear lines we understand. We understand that the heart, for instance, does not produce acid and break down food particles in the body. We know that.
Yep.
We're pretty good about that, and so because of that, it means we can figure out more things about it, and that's why we know. Yeah, like you said earlier, if
Hold
we
on.
take
There's a non-zero probability that I have some unheard of mutation where my heart produces amylase now.
I mean, and
Like,
you know what the problem is, I guess, philosophically.
how do you know my heart doesn't produce amylase, SR? You don't.
I want to know, this is real quick, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, but you're telling me that when a patient comes in with like a concussion or something, exhibiting like brain trauma, you're telling me that the doctors don't stand around talking about how they know they're not brains in a vat? Is that what you're saying? Like they just move past that and like get on with the whole fixing of the brain and things. Is that I just always I just always thought they would just be more like, "Oh, we don't even know we exist. So like, should I really help this person with cancer?"
Yeah. Well, according to Locke's philosophy,
Yeah, yeah.
I think that we have to use a beta blocker.
Would not
Like,
be
I don't know how
would
to
not
say.
be a valuable would not be a valuable. Both of these approaches are just that. They're approaches, they're methods, they're tools. And there is a time and a place to use a hammer. And there are other times and places where that would not be the right tool at all. And if you're running around with a hammer constantly just smacking everything that looks like a nail, well, you're gonna have a bad time, people. You are gonna have a bad time. Because I can tell you, go sit down in a room, go sit down in the armchairs with all the philosophy nerds, and just really, really try to convince them to just let you do medical experiments on them. It's not gonna go very well. They're not gonna want to do that. They don't often
Yeah.
we don't often give each other IVs. So
But then also on the flip side, like if you go in a community of all science nerds, there comes a point where you cannot be 100% on your statistics. Like your
Mhm.
confidence interval, like your level of confidence cannot be 100%. And there's a reason why in science we're very conservative a lot our with our claims
Yeah.
because we know the thing that I studied is a very small range of context. So like even from the stats side, you have to be willing to give a little bit and say it's okay that um like it's even added an alpha of 0.05. We're measuring significance at like a 5% chance that it's not a coincidence.
Right.
So that's still a pretty high chance that it
Yeah.
could be a coincidence. I mean, 5% still 5%. But that's oftentimes the cutoff. It's good enough to make uh to do something about it.
Yeah.
Like if you have 95% of a chance that it's not a coincidence, I would probably intervene. Like talking about, I don't know, I love to use examples of like smoking and lung cancer. We know
Mm.
that they are related.
Yeah.
And so even not having a perfect 100% confidence is okay. It's enough for me. And it also depends on the intervention we're going to use, right? So certain levels of confidence are going to be different based on what I'm trying to do. For example, something non-invasive, something easy.
Mm.
Like if I were to test somebody's reflexes, okay, it might not be accurate all the time. My skills might not be 100% accurate
Mhm.
in detecting something all of the time. But it's not invasive. It's not really all that inconvenient for somebody. It's not going to really ruin somebody's day
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I
Tap their
tested their
knee.
reflexes and it didn't yield important data or it wasn't the correct thing to do at the time. However, um I should have a good confidence in something like a heart transplant. I should be
Yeah.
pretty confident that that is the correct move
Mhm.
from that standpoint because if I'm wrong and I unnecessarily give somebody a heart transplant, that's a big problem.
Mhm.
So, I mean, confidence even is something like, and this relates kind of back to philosophy of like how extraordinary does the claim need to be to require a certain level of evidence, right? Like you have some
Mm.
give there on your side, right?
Absolutely, absolutely we do. Because there are just exactly, what I was just joking about the sitting around, talking about whether or not we're brains in a vat. Like, technically, we don't have a great answer to some of these things, folks. Like, I'll burst anybody's bubble out there that it hasn't already been burst. Like, but where where does logic come from? What is logic? How did it get here? Why does it always, some of those big funky fuzzy questions we don't have an answer to. That just seems to be the case. It doesn't matter what we're using or what we're looking at or talking about or how many times we talk about it. But exactly like what Ben was saying, where there is at a certain point this moment where you just go, "Hey man, look, I guess I guess it could be that super rare disease that like 6 people in the whole world have ever had in 100 some odd years of medicine. It could be that. It could be. But the guy also could have just eaten some bad shellfish the other day, And that is way more likely considering where he said he bought seafood from, which was some gas station, Like, he's probably just got something there we can take care of rather than go through this absurdity and word game and just kind of flip backwards over and over again. And that's the same thing. If we're sitting here and we're trying to break down why we act morally, for instance. That's one of the biggest things people are talking about with philosophy. Why we do good things, why we don't do bad things, this and that, right? Well, yeah, I mean, we can go down this whole route of how do we know we're not brains in a vat? But neither of us have a great answer to that.
There's a
And
non-zero probability that I am a brain in a vat.
and that is true. And that is true, but it's not gonna help us when it comes to figuring out why we do good things, right? Or it's not gonna help us when it comes to figuring out, do we have a soul or not, and the importance of that for us as living creatures, and it's not gonna help us figure out whether or not we got IBS. Like, that argument, that understanding just isn't gonna do anything in any of those realms, so why talk about it too much? Yes, signpost it and we'll move on with our life. Same thing in the lab. Hey, it could be the case, yeah, there is that 5% still out there that we're not positive about, but 95% says it's this over here. And that is a reasonable enough stance to move forward. Um
So Amit's got a comment
mhm. I mean, he's
about,
not
yeah.
He's not wrong. I think a lot of times that's where most people stand. There are some people that say that um, logic is not a presupposition, that it is something that we actually test and have evidence for. In either scenario, it kind of doesn't matter because we all seem to have to use it, we all seem to want to use it. We all talk about us being, I'm so logical, you're not logical. I'm rational, you're not rational. And we do that all the time, so it's kind of like, again, at the end of the day, yeah, there's that non-zero chance that's sitting out there that it could be this one thing that we haven't heard of for a long time or whatever, like, but it's more beneficial that we give the guy this medicine, that we do this surgery.
Also, I
Um,
think that the whole non-zero probability thing is intellectual laziness.
mhm, mhm.
It's just a cop out of saying,
It's
well,
avoiding.
yeah, it's avoiding
Yeah,
exactly. You're not actually demonstrating anything by saying that.
right.
I think
And
you can do better if you really want to demonstrate something. Like do the work, put in the
mhm,
effort, and that's something that unfortunately, if you're gonna have conversations about any of this, you should put in some work ahead of
yeah,
time, thinking about these arguments and like, and I think something interesting from both of our perspectives. I think it's a little bit interesting in how kind of the level of legwork you have to do, like, ahead of time or, like, during the actual, like, debate
Mm,
encounter.
yeah.
I find philosophers have to do way more work during the actual encounter because there's so much messiness going on there. Whereas, like, from the science side, our terms are already defined. Our stats are like our levels of significance. We can pretty much say, hey, here's the level of significance I'm using. Good, cool. So you have to put in from our side, you have to put in more work, I think, before you go into it because you got to do the study.
Yeah.
You got to figure out your sources of error. You got to figure out your limitations of your study. You got to do your stats. Like figure out that your math was correct and that you're not making any one of the four types of error. Um, but then once that's done, you can go into the conversation and say, hey, data. Here's
Mhm,
my data.
mhm.
Here's why it's significant.
But
Here's what we
don't
do about it. So we don't have to do as much. Like it's funny because you can't. It's hard to debate science because it's like data. Here's data,
Mhm.
and if new data comes that is better than the old data, it takes over. It's like there's not really a debate there. Really, the debate in that science, it's not about the data itself. It's about what do we do about the data, and
Right.
that's more of an ethics and kind of philosophy question. But if we are just debating the science itself, there's not much you have to do in the encounter. So
Mm-mm.
think about this too. If you're going to go into a debate, which perspective you take could also like the amount of work you want to put in before and during could help you make your decision about how you want to approach it. Because
Yeah.
honestly, I'm lazy in the debate. Like but before call-in shows or before anything, like I'm reading so much because I need to make sure that when I get into the conversation, I have things to pull up and that my information is correct. But once I have that, that's how I can get onto a call-in show and just spout stuff
Right.
because I've been reading it like for hours and hours and hours reading about it.
But but Ben, don't you know? I mean, you must know this, that all science comes from philosophy. So therefore, because science originated in philosophy, that philosophy is better. It's much more important, right? Except, of course, that's a fallacious argument
Yeah,
too.
I think they're both important for different contexts.
Exactly. Exactly. It's all about what are you trying to do? What are you trying how are you trying to approach this situation? And we need both of them because yeah, exactly what you just said. Like we can't really dispute the fact. I mean, some people try, I guess, but that's a weird thing. But
And usually
yeah.
those people don't have the stats to back it up because
Oh
like
no.
I
Oh
have
no.
I have merch on my store that says let me see your p value because I think it's funny. But yeah, like I mean that's how I approach a lot of arguments. Like if someone says they have data, I'm like let me see that
Let's
data.
see it.
Give me
Right.
your p value. And
Right.
oftentimes these people don't even know what a p value is. So that tells me a lot right there. But if I'm talking to a fellow scientist, like okay, yeah, what are the stats on this? Or if
Mhm.
someone comes up to me and says I have this new treatment idea or have this new test for something. The tests are one of my favorite things to cover because, I mean, the first question to ask is what is the sensitivity and what is the specificity? And someone
Yeah.
who knows the test well could give me those numbers. And then I could make conclusions based on those numbers they gave me. It's very easy. But a lot of people talking about like the COVID tests or whatever, like don't know what those mean. Like, okay, you
Mhm.
don't actually know what you're talking
Mhm.
about because you can't give me the numbers that would support what you're saying.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's where again a lot of the philosophy side of it is important. I mean, we have to make sure we understand the terms that we're talking about all the time in philosophy. And we constantly have to do that and learn and listen and refine these concepts. And the same thing needs to be true when it comes to when we're talking about science, y'all. If we're trying to sit there as these philosophically, intelligent individuals, well, when the scientist comes up to us and they say things like p-value, it's probably worth just taking a moment to go, hey, So, Ben, what do you mean by that? It's important. It's important to know that stuff. And it's important for us when we see people presenting this stuff to us. We'll tease a little bit. Like sometimes you see these infomercials, guys. You go and you see this infomercial and it tells you, "Oh, we got this study and that therefore you should be, I don't know, licking tree bark all the time or whatever. By the way, call us now and we'll send you 3 bottles for the price of 7." Just scamming people, right? And that's important too, to have that philosophy. Well, Ben just said, "Show us the data," and they showed us the data. Ah, yes. But now here's where we think about that validity side of the argument again. So they've got the soundness. They're showing you, hey, this is a heart. This is what a heart does. Hey, this is what this is what tree bark is. Here's the chemical in tree bark. But now let's find that connection. Let's find that bridge from those pieces of data to the argument, to this conclusion. Do they all follow each other? Is that actually what's happening here? Or is somebody just scamming me, trying to get an extra $50 out of me, Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm still not,
Not convinced of a soul.
I'm not. I know, I'm a bummer. I know. But
So with that being said, because we have an hour left,
we're
so
crushing
we
it.
can't be convinced right now, at least, of a soul.
Yeah.
But how about our favorite topic, the one that every time we go on a call-in show, every call-in show host I've ever met is like, yes, I want to do this again. I want someone to call in with another version of the Kalam cosmological argument.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh.
So,
Oh my
so we're
gosh.
gonna talk about the Kalam because
Mm,
it is one of those that just keeps showing up
it does.
everywhere,
Boy,
and it's
does
a
it.
great. It's not a great argument, but it is a
Mm-mm.
great example of something that we should be ready to
Mhm.
talk about because people bring it to us. And of course, I'm not saying that you have to engage with anybody on anything, but should you choose to engage with people on something like this, it's important to know that you're approaching it in a good way. And of course,
Mhm.
these are just our takes on it, how we individually would approach it. So many other people have equally good ways of looking at it. This is just our preferences.
Right.
But for people in the audience who maybe have wanted to have discussions like this and don't really know where to go,
Mhm.
this is another goal of the show was is when you have the call-in shows, people don't really explain why they're asking the questions they're
It's hard.
asking or
Yeah.
where they're going with it, and you can pick up some things by watching it over again. But I think it's fun to explain like where our thought process is going and why
Mhm.
we're asking these types of questions of people.
Yeah, and just
So, yeah,
I was just gonna say real quick, just like you were saying, hey, look, you folks, you don't have to engage in every single discussion and argument that comes your way. It's also okay to just say, hey, I don't know this sometimes. And to go look and see if people like, Ben has some information on this. Sometimes it's just really valuable to say, I'm just not sure, but I know some place where I could get some good reliable information. And then just go sit down and learn. That's okay. So, but yeah,
yeah. So the Kalam, I feel like this is a great one to start
let's
with
do
some
it.
philosophy. So, SR, can you explain what is the cosmological argument?
Yeah, well, so the the cosmological argument is, in and of itself, a style of argumentation, and there is a specific version of this known as the Kalam cosmological argument. It's not terribly worth it, in my opinion, to explain
Mhm.
too much about where it comes from and all that jazz. I've seen a lot of people yell at each other about this, but the Kalam cosmological argument is the fun, I guess, pet project, more or less, the favoritist argument of a very well known apologist, William Lane Craig. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard it before, but we'll just give it real quick because it's simple, it's short. And that's one of the values of it is philosophically speaking, if you have this really long drawn out argument, it's a lot harder to make that structurally okay. But so here we go. It's simple. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. We'll just leave it right there. Simple, easy peasy. Now, for anybody out there that does, stand on this side of non-God belief, you'll notice there's a word missing, which is God. It doesn't get us to a deity of any kind. It just gets us to the conclusion. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, there are constructions of this where people add other things and so forth. Craig himself, of course, has added a handful of different things and understandings over the years that has eventually gotten us to a god. But um, there's some other problems here that people push back on a lot of times. And one of the first ones is just, did the universe begin to exist? Is that something that happened or not? Um, this is always a place where we say, well, what do we mean by the universe? Right? Obviously, we're not just talking about the Earth. Obviously, we're not just talking about the solar system. Okay, so we're talking about all the galaxies and stuff. It's like, well, potentially even more than that. Basically, when we're talking about universe here, we're just talking about essentially all of existence is how Craig likes to roll it normally. So if you're saying, you know, what about all these parallel dimensions and all that? Well, we're just going to wrap it all together and say that that's what we're talking about for this purpose, just to really get at the very first beginning, the prime mover, the first domino in the line of infinite dominoes that brought us here today. Um, so yeah, I mean, the idea of something um beginning to exist in and of itself, the universe beginning to exist it, it isn't as founded as we think it is. A lot of us out there, of course, are going to say, well, the Big Bang, we've got cosmic radiation, microwave background radiation, and so forth. And you may have seen that picture where it kind of looks like a weird moldy hamburger. You know what I'm talking about? You know that one?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like the green and the red and so forth. That
It's the hamburger that killed the health inspector in
Yes,
SpongeBob.
yes,
It's the Krabby Patty.
and
The
it
nasty patty.
is something to be cautious of. That may be scientifically or philosophically unsound, but that's our advice. Don't eat moldy hamburgers, people. But we we do have an issue with all of existence beginning. That in and of itself may be problematic. And there are some things now when it comes to how we understand time that definitely pushes back on Craig's understanding here. If we think of time as, panels, one panel happens, the next panel happens, the next panel happens just in a row forever and ever and ever. Well, we can have an easier discussion on this idea of beginnings, because there would, in that sense, definitively be a panel at which something is there, and there would be a panel where something is not there, right? I mean, we could show that in that conception of time. But if we're thinking of time more in this sense of a fluid, fluctuating, all at once type thing, well, then the concept of beginning and ending is definitely a lot shakier. Of course, we have, just general causality as well. As Ben was talking about earlier, the idea of something correlating and being the cause of something, as we all know, that they're not as tightly knit together as we want them to be, right? We find correlations that aren't the cause, and um that can lead us to accepting conclusions that aren't correct, that aren't true. But yeah, I mean, this is something that a lot of people have talked about for a really, really long time. I think Craig put it together back in like the 70s and wrote a book on it. I mean, I think that was, when he, yeah, 79 is what it says. Of course, it comes from, traditions of hundreds and hundreds of years of people having this similar type of discussion. And we need more. We need more.
Yeah. Yeah.
What sciencey stuff can
Okay,
help us here,
so I'm
Tim?
focusing on not necessarily like the science of, cosmology and things. I'm focusing on the scientific method and how we would scientifically demonstrate this.
Mhm.
If I were to design a study I could not really do it. And again, this is a
Mm,
similar problem with the soul, and that,
yeah.
like, the big one that comes to mind is the fact that, again, we have not seen other universes or other existences at all. We haven't seen them happen or be caused or whatever. So we don't have anything to compare this one to. So people like to use a certain fallacy that I'll let SR talk about in a little bit, probably. Um, where they'll say, uh, like, look at the car out in your driveway
Mm,
that has a cause, or they'll say like that tree has a cause, and like they'll use that and then say everything that you've seen has a cause, and then relate that back. And that's again a problem, like I mentioned with gravity. It's like you see in this context, yes, 100% of the time in this specific context, that is what we see. But if I were to apply this to a different context, I don't know what would happen because we haven't tested it. And the thing is, we can't apply it to another context because we don't know of any other context yet at this point in time. Maybe someday we will learn of another universe or another existence that is happening and can make a comparison. But at this point in time, we can't do that. We have no control group. We've no
mhm,
way to analyze this. And something here too is, if we're going to statistically test anything, the um the significance of our data relies a lot, and our confidence also relies a lot on the sample size.
mm,
And we have a sample size of 1. And normally, I mean, talking in most science, like a sample size of 35 is kind of like bare minimum, simply because of the math involved. So you're dealing with something called power, and power is the likelihood that you correctly reject the null hypothesis when the alternative hypothesis is correct. So, um, I'm going to explain this a lot on my channel. I'm going to have videos about power and about alpha and beta, and these all relate to different types of error, which I have a video on that. Shameless plug. Because this all relates to type 1 and type 2 errors. But the that probability, that power, relies a lot on the sample size. And the smaller sample size, the less likely you're going to accurately reject the null hypothesis when you are supposed to. And oftentimes we have to subtract 1 from the sample size and then go with that when calculating out our equations, because you have to account for um, that error within, like, having a smaller sample size. You are penalized in the math because that smaller sample size is penalizing you. You are less likely to detect a significant change. But if we subtract 1 from a sample size of 1, we have effectively 0.
yeah, that seems right to
So,
me.
can we Can we do any of the math and even calculate significance? No, we can't. You cannot statistically do this with a sample size of 1.
And just
So,
like you were saying earlier, man, I mean, this is the importance of taking that approach to things is because we've got this person coming into the ER presenting certain problems and they're dying, right? And we got to do something about it. And we can't just go, well, you remember that one time Dr. What's his face did that thing and then it worked for that one time? And it was like, well, yeah, but do we know that that's right? Like, how do we know that that's the right thing to do? And if all we've got is that one example, if we're having trouble constructing a test that can tell us whether or not this thing is going on, if our data is not reliable, well, yeah, the consequences of making those conclusions are potentially somebody's life, right? And that's not a good thing. I think generally hospitals want to keep people alive. Is that right, Ben, or has that changed over the
yeah,
years?
yeah, no,
Still the
generally, yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, and these variables matter. The
Yeah,
variables
exactly.
change the equation. And it's the same thing in logic.
Mhm,
If you add more premises,
right.
it's going to change your conclusion because you now have to work with more things involved, more factors that change how you're looking at it. So if one person has a certain condition, like, and even if you had the same condition as this other person, but your ages were different,
Mm,
like a great example of this is osteoporosis treatment, because you're going to give an estrogen dominant person um, different types of medication for their osteoporosis, because whether or not they are in menopause, like if they've gone through menopause or not, that's going to matter.
mm,
And cancer history is going to matter, because if we're giving somebody something that modulates their estrogen, we need to be very careful about that in somebody
mm,
who is producing a lot of estrogen currently, and or has some cancer history of estrogen dependent cancers. So even if both of you, both these people, one's 73 years old, the other one is like has a early onset osteoporosis. Maybe they have um, a different cause of osteoporosis, such as like osteogenesis imperfecta, or they have diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, some higher risk factors, and a cancer history. You're going to give different treatments to that 73-year-old without a lot of estrogen, no cancer history, than you would for that like 40-something-year-old with
right.
autoimmune disease and cancer history, and is premenopausal. So those variables matter, and
And that
that's kind of where I was going with that.
yeah, and that is true with philosophy too. Again, we took the most basic, the most simple, the easiest Kalam. But there are the constructions where when defining what a cause is, they add these particulars onto it that essentially put it in a realm of something totally different, where it says this cause would have to be timeless because at the beginning of the universe time came to exist. Well, it would have to be immaterial because at the beginning of the universe we didn't have material. um and so exactly what Ben was saying, the different funky things that show up every so often. What was the technical word you use? Variables? I think that's
Mm,
probably, I like different funky things. But those those different characteristics, those different little nuances do matter. Whether we're doing science, whether we're doing philosophy, we have to be able to hear those out, listen to them, and think about them. But again, we also need to be comfortable with the idea that if they aren't coherent, if the likelihood is 2%, if these things are just probably not the answer because of all of these other reasons, We don't have to keep hanging on to them. We can move on. We don't have to just fall back on this and say no, no, no. It has to be this rare parasite. No, it doesn't. And by stepping away from those things that we don't have good reason to accept, well, we can get to right answers quicker, and we can do cooler things. That's why we have this whole like Skype, Zoom chat, I mean, we got VR, guys. We're implanting all kinds of technology into people. It's amazing. And it's because we figure out what the heck we're trying to go for. We ask some questions, we think about what it might look like, and we go, how would we show this? How would we test this? Are we sure this leads to this? But again, if we're having trouble defining something, if we're having trouble putting boxes around it and doing that demonstration, it's not, you don't have enough to believe yet.
So a couple things. This first thing is just something funny that I noticed. Um, you can definitely tell when SR and I are both out of our elements because like SR will say some like will be very good about, oh yeah, it's this specific fallacy, or like it's this specific argument, or like this specific school of philosophy, and then we'll use like weird descriptions of medical things that I say. And then I'm on the flip side where I'm like, I'll spout the medical jargon, and then I'm like, I don't know what this fallacy is called, but then I'll just describe what's happening. Like, yeah, you're doing the thing where your words are the same, but the meaning's different.
Mhm.
And I sound like a dumbass because
Well,
I don't know how to, because I
no,
can't be as cool and be like, yeah, it's the equivocation fallacy. I'm
you the other day,
just a
Ben
founder.
was telling me about his rotation he's on right now, and he was talking about some of the stuff he was doing with um what was the technical term you, but it was catheters, but like heart caths,
Yeah,
right?
cardiac catheters, yeah.
Okay, cardiac catheters. Thank you. See, and Ben's telling me all this stuff, and I go, hey man, just real quick, just so I'm making sure. I know it's more technical, but you talking about sticking tubes into people's hearts, right? And he's like, yeah, pretty much. And that's important. It's important that we recognize that we don't have all the knowledge and the understanding on the other side, and that's valuable. And it's good for us to remember that when Ben's talking to me about something and I'm throwing out, these massive 12 syllable words back to back to back to back to back, it's not helpful. It's not getting through. It's not we're not making any progress in understanding each other's sides. And so, at first Ben says to me, "Oh, well, it's this specific blah 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 enzyme blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, hang on. Can you what's the 5-year-old version of that?" And he's like, well, basically when you eat food, it gets broken down in the tummy. It's like, great, awesome. That's that's how I needed it explained.
Yeah,
Oh.
definitely. It's so interesting having these conversations. And also I wanted to mention something else about the Kalam is that it's interesting to me that people love to talk about a singular cause, like that there has
Mhm.
to be a cause, one cause,
Yeah.
when many things have multiple causes, like multiple factors that all work together to produce some effect on something. Like, and this is something I see a lot with um, biological sex, and people are constantly looking for the one keystone thing
I know.
that determines your biological sex. And I keep trying to explain, like, no, this is multifactorial. There are
Mhm.
multiple things that influence each other to give you a combination of things which we determine as sex. Like, it's not, sex is not referring to one thing, it's referring to a combination of things. And that's why it's so nebulous. And that's why we need to reframe things, because people are applying a one word and implying a single thing when we really mean a combination.
Mhm.
So it makes it very ambiguous.
Mhm.
But we're kind of doing the same thing with the Kalam and with saying that there's this one point. There has to
Yeah.
be this one thing that caused everything else. Like, but could there be a possibility that it's multiple things?
Sure.
And that's like
Right.
not something. It's still even that point. And that's not a whole lot to even go into because it's not like we can demonstrate that either.
And I was gonna say
But
it kind of points us back to what you were saying earlier and about the struggle that it would be to have some type of control group, you know? Um, this is kinda where, people talk about walking on a beach and seeing this pocket watch, and you just know that there was a designer behind it, right? Because why? Because what? And the answer is that really we do have a control, right? We go outside and we look at stuff and we don't see pocket watches just appearing out of the ground like we do trees, you know? We're pretty good. I guess maybe there are some things we don't know, but like when it comes to like cats, like we're pretty good about knowing how we get other cats, right? Like we get
Mhm.
little cats and then they grow up into bigger cats and then they generally make smaller cats again, and then it just like the cycle keeps repeating.
The
Um,
cat cycle.
yeah, the cat cycle. Yeah, yeah. But there's something medically there I'm getting wrong, but I think it's pretty
the
close.
cat the cat cycle.
But I mean, when when we go out there and we want to make these intense philosophical claims about the universe having a beginning to its existence, right? About the universe having a cause, right? Everything beginning to exist having a cause. Well, the problem is that what's the control? What's the test that we set up to demonstrate this? How do we show this? And a lot of times people, get pushback on that and they'll say, "Oh, you just want everything in a test tube, you know? You can't put love in a test tube." And it's like, "Well, you can and you can't, right? Cuz you can put these multi factors all together. You can say, "Well, we know about this chemical in the brain." Right? And you say, "Well, that alone isn't love." Well, no, of course not. But we also know about experiences with other people and memories, right? Like we know that you went to the park with this person and you guys laid on the blanket and ate the picnic lunch and had a good time. Like, and so we can add these things together and kind of show like, hey, there's something different here than when you did that with, Jill, right? Or maybe this time that you were hanging out with Tim, you thought, this is so much better than when I was hanging out with so and so. Okay, well, so there you go. We have those two different groups of it. We have that control there, but where is that when it comes to the universe? What do we have out there? I don't think there's been a single thing in my whole time of existing, Ben, that I have experienced anything that is not like of the universe, you
Mhm.
know? I don't
Yep.
know if there's ever been a time like that. So,
Mhm.
um, I don't know, maybe one day, maybe one day.
Yeah. Do we wanna address, um, the structure of the argument at all?
So we can a little, but in all fairness, I tend to I tend to just I don't really have a problem with it. And I think that's
Okay.
one of the biggest reasons with why the basic Kalam has stuck around for as long as it has. It structurally speaking, it is pretty on point. And again, it's just like that one we had for souls, right? All humans have souls. Ben's a human. Ben has a soul. Like, I guess, structurally speaking, okay, we're golden. And that's great. That's a super, super important aspect that has to be nailed down. It just has to be. Otherwise, this whole philosophy game we're playing, we don't get to take the next step. We don't get to do the next thing. Um, but this is why when you reached out and you said, man, I got this really cool idea. I think it'll be so much fun. Let's figure out some things to talk about. This is why I thought this was so awesome, because yeah, we sit down all day and we work and we work and we get the definitions and we put them in the right places and we make sure we're not using the black swan fallacy or the composition division. We're not doing any of that. But how do we demonstrate? How do we demonstrate some of these things? And that's really where the Kalam is super faulty in my eyes. Because yeah, hey, sure, you got it, man. I'm not seeing a fallacy there. I'm not seeing one in terms of the basic structure. But where I have the problem is exactly where you were having the problem. Like, what does this look
Mhm.
like? What does this test look like to show us, to give us some kind of credence one way or the other, you know? Have we ever seen anything that's immaterial? Have we ever
Mhm.
gotten any demonstration of anything immaterial? If someone comes in to the clinic one day and has chest pains, are we gonna jump to something we've never seen before? Or are we gonna rule out the options of stuff we've
Mhm.
already tested, you know?
And I think it's definitely valuable to help people understand the thought process
Mhm.
of working through something like this, because too
Absolutely.
often people think of, like, if we're thinking about this as like a stepwise process, like A to B to C, people often they think A and immediately go to C,
Mhm,
and they're
mhm,
not
mhm.
thinking about the continuum of steps in between to get there. And it's, of course, like, doing this kind of work is labor intensive, and it makes your brain hurt a lot, and it's easier to skip the steps and go straight to the conclusion.
Yeah.
But I don't think, like, people don't realize that they're not actually thinking it all the way through. And I
Mhm,
think that's why my approach to certain callers is to ask them to, right now, can we design a study together? Can
mm,
we, because I think people are ready with what they think is evidence, not knowing that it's not actually evidence. Um, but if you just straight up ask somebody, like, show me the evidence, they probably don't understand that they've skipped those steps to produce the evidence.
right.
So if we can help them, guide them into a thought process that works to get to the truth. And I know people on the philosophy side do this too, oftentimes helping people put something into a formal argument, like using tools of syllogism to help somebody think through the steps of how they got from A
Mhm,
to C. But then on my side, like, I've had a couple calls where I've said, okay, what would we need to do to determine that this is true? And we just have a little thought experiment right there. We say, okay, what is our question? And then what are we hypothesizing about this? Okay, so then what are some possibilities that we can think through? And then what are some real world things that I can do to rule this in or rule this out? How would I, if it is this option, like if it was an alien, and SR
mm,
did this with, we did this on the perspective. Like, if it is an alien, what would I expect to see? What are some things I can look for to leave that as an option? Or what if it was somebody walking in your garden? Like, would you see footprints? Would you see evidence of somebody having a presence there? Are things going to be broken? Certain steps along that way, you can design that study. And that was more of a kind of a medical line of thinking there. But on similar lines, if we wanted to um, demonstrate something like a soul, or like the kalam, going through the the question and then saying, okay, how do I get my independent and dependent variables? What are they? What are my variables that I'm? What am I testing for? And then what am I not going to mess with? And then what other are the other variables in the equation that might mess this up? What are some things that could lead me to a wrong conclusion. And then we say, okay, so those things that are going to mess with this, let's control them. They are the controlled variables. I'm going to find a way to eliminate them from the equation so we don't have to work with them anymore. Like, okay. And then, so once we've done that, how do we collect our data? And so going through the steps, people oftentimes, you start going in that direction and they kind of sink back a little bit. Like, oh, I guess you could do it this way. And it's not you coming straight at them. It's them having their own thought of, okay, there's some more work I got to do.
Yeah.
But they're doing it right there with you. You're helping them along. And if you both can get to a conclusion that they already agreed with, cool. I mean, then you've demonstrated it, or you found a way to demonstrate it. Or they might walk away and understand that their argument isn't good anymore and they shouldn't use it.
And
But
we have to remember on the philosophy side that so many of the arguments that we can present, the only reason we can do that is because we aren't worried about that soundness principle. And the reason we're not worried about that soundness principle is because somebody out there just did all that stuff that Ben was talking about. Sat down, thought about the independent and dependent variables, got a control freaking group, got an experiment freaking group, came up with a thought and said, oh, what if this? How could we show that? What's the test? And they did that for us. And so much of the Kalam cosmological argument is based on a lot of this stuff. I mean, if it wasn't for us finding that weird moldy hamburger of a picture that we found with the microwave radiation, I mean, William Lane Craig would not have constructed the Kalam in such a way. I mean, he admits that. He says, I have to rely on our understanding of the Big Bang. I have to rely on our understanding of particles and energy. We don't just get to throw out E equals MC squared because we don't like it or it's just funky to us. No, we've demonstrated these things. We've tested these things. And so we have to rely on that when we're constructing these arguments, when we're trying to think about all of these weird fuzzy things that some people say are out there and some people say prove things. And well, we've got some stuff that we know about. And again, like Ben was saying earlier, there's a little bit of ground on both sides that has to be given when it comes to absolute certainty, because it just seems to be the case that we're never going to know 100% this is the cause of the symptoms that the patient has, or this is definitively the answer to why logic, right? We just don't have that. And that's okay though, because what we do have is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence, an overwhelming freaking obvious validity when it comes to the structure. And we've got that demonstration to bolster that soundness. And it's fine that we're not all 100% knowledgeable on what was it again? Cardiac
catheters.
Cardiac catheters. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna get it one of these days. But that's okay that we don't all know that. That's okay that we don't all know, composition division fallacy. That's fine, because we can go listen to people that do know about that stuff and we can see the argument from the other side. And that alone is going to be really beneficial for us. Hey, maybe we all start believing in souls because of it. If they're out there, I want to believe in them. But if we don't have a reliable way to test for them, why do we accept them? Why do we accept this beginning to the universe thing? Why do we accept this cause of all existence thing? I don't know. Some people feel really convinced by it though.
And I'll just sit back here and people will throw out some weird stats where they just did they'll calculate the probability by like the method that we all learn in grade school. Like that's not how you cannot just do that kind of like division equation to get you probability. Also, like, I mean, I can sit back and be like, yeah, you're giving me a percentage of how likely something is. Show me your math. Show me your stats.
Mhm.
Like, I want to see what you did to get that number. And most of the time, they didn't do any of the math to get that number, and their number was pointless. So, like, I mean, I've done math on my channel. Like, I've done math, like in my videos.
But how
And
do
you
we
can
know
see my
math
math.
is real, Ben? I
How do
mean,
we know math is real?
yeah, like show me the
well,
number 2. Where is it? You know, how do you weigh pluses and minuses? You know, how do you just
yeah. But it's getting close to the end of the show. We can talk forever about things like this, and we're gonna bring you more topics in the future. And
we got
what
some
we
good
do need
stuff.
to do, which we'll talk about backstage sometime, is we have to peg down like a day of the week that like we're gonna have our shows and how often we're gonna have the shows and like that kind of stuff. Because this is usually my medical myth slot. So we're
over,
gonna
I'm
figure that out
sorry.
later. But this was kind of our trial run of this show, and I think it went pretty well.
I thought so. I
It was a
enjoyed
fun
it.
time.
And look, everybody out there, you guys already actually know what to do, which is you make the comments and you hit the buttons, the like button and the subscribe button and so forth. And in those comments, you can say things like, Ben, Rarity, this was terrible. Please don't do this again. We'll accept those. We'd prefer that they be a little bit nicer than that. But we want to know your feedback. If you enjoyed this, tell us about it. And more importantly, Ben, tell us about where the heck we're all supposed to be going next and why we're all here.
Yeah. So we are all here for the Lavender Lady Operation Lavender Kidney fundraiser to help her get a kidney, help her get after surgery care because she's going to need a lot of help after this. This is a very, very big surgery. So I've pinned the link to the coffee in the chat. So please, if you are able to donate, this is 100% an amazing cause. And I say this every time we do something like this. Like, if we're going to talk about humanism and we're going to talk about caring about people, like, you can put your money where your mouth is. And when I say that, I don't only mean your finances. Like, you can like the video, you can subscribe to Lavender Lady's channel because that'll help her. You can share out the links to the next few people on the list for the fundraiser. You can spread awareness. Like, there's so many things that you can do that don't involve finances. Like, even being here now in the side chat has been really helpful for this. It's helping the word get out. So thank you to everybody who's already contributed, and it's been a great fundraiser. Next on the list is Atheist Edge. We're gonna go over there, and I'm gonna put that link. He doesn't have like a specific live showing there, so I'm just putting your whole channel link. But we're gonna play Sherlock games. I think it's not an open panel, so he already has people scheduled to be on that panel.
Nice.
But you can be in the chat and you can participate as well, doing more of that abductive reasoning stuff, which is really good fun. So go hang out there. I do also really quick want to thank my patrons because I got to make sure that they get recognition. So Reggie and Kevin, thank you for your support. I really appreciate everything that you do for this channel. And we have 6 minutes left, so we can do some more shilling. SR,
I was just gonna guess quick those organs that were on the screen there. Was one of them a sad kidney?
Yes, one of them was a kidney.
Okay.
Here you go. The kidney's sad.
The kidney's sad. Is that a pancreas at the bottom?
That is a pancreas.
Oh my gosh, I'm feeling great. Okay, I got one more, and this is it. Okay, this one's tough though. I'm thinking stomach.
No, it's
heart?
Green. It's green.
No, it's actually green. You're saying it's real.
Well, in real life, it's not. Well, it depends. It's not really that green in real life, but
not spleen.
You're close, but it's on the other side of the body from the spleen.
What is that?
But that implies that you would know what's on the other side of the body from the spleen.
I don't even know which side of the body the spleen is on to begin with.
The spleen is on the left side of the body.
What is it?
It's the gallbladder.
Oh, the gallbladder. Son of a. Yeah, damn. Gosh. Hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I'm okay with that.
No, you did a good job. You got I'm surprised you got the pancreas because it looks like
Yeah.
a glob of fat.
It does. It looks
So
like a puffy cloud almost, but
yeah, it looks kind of looks like that in the body too. It just looks
that's
like
nice.
fat.
See, that's fun. See what
So
kind of great stuff you get to learn here, people.
yes.
What am
So
I? Am
where
I?
can people find you, SR?
You can technically find me on all the things. Secular Rarity is out there on the Facebook and the TikToks and the Instagrams and all that. You know, whatever. If you just want to hang out and follow me, my suggestion though is if you do want to see me, subscribe here. Subscribe at places like the Nonprofits or Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. Those are the places that I get to hang out the most and just chat about stuff. But yeah, shout at me. Yell at Ben actually to yell at me just so that he gets more engagement and stuff. Just send him messages that are supposed to be private for me on his YouTube channel. Just like post the comments.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Don't harass my boy. Or else you'll be dealing with these hands. So again, he's actually the one that's trained in fighting. I just pretend to be. So
I did find the link to the next live. So I put it in the chat for the Sherlock scan games with Jim, and that's gonna be fun. So we're gonna head over in a couple minutes, 3 minutes.
Okay.
3 minutes. He's gonna go live.
Time.
We'll go
We
over
gotta-
there.
gotta
So I guess
figure
I'll
out-
show what the stuff that I'm on.
You got a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was on a lot this past week. I think
Mhm.
things have calmed down a little bit. But you can find me. Oh, they in the chat. They want me to tell you that you're cute.
Thank you. Thank you. Those types of comments are always welcome from me. I know many people are like, watch with the comments on the hosts and stuff. But for me, anytime you see me on Ben's channel, you're allowed to objectify me as much or as little as you please. So you don't have to objectify me, but you
Yeah,
can.
as long as it's consensual, it's
That's right.
fine.
That's right. That's right.
So, so you can find me here, this channel. You can also find me on Twitch, on Student Dr. Ben. I do trivia nights and play some games. They're super fun. Those are on Friday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And then sometimes you can find me on the shows on the line. It sounds like eventually I'm going to be probably going back on Transatlantic. They want me back on that show sometimes.
Awesome.
I'm doing more stuff with the ACA. I know SR is also doing more things with the ACA now.
Yeah.
So you can find us on some of their shows.
When's you got a werewolves video coming out soon, right?
Did
you already mention
That's
that?
a good point. I do have a werewolves video coming out on Tuesday. I think I only picked Tuesday because I have something going on that day. That means I'm not at my rotation. So basically I have most of the day off.
Nice.
So that next video is talking about werewolf disease, which is the colloquial name for hypertrichosis lanuginosa, which is a big word. But basically people that have hair in places where there shouldn't be, and they were thought of as werewolves. So that video is going to come out on Tuesday, and it'll be fun. We'll watch that together. It's been fun.
It's been great, man. I always love hanging out with you. It's always a good time. I learn all types of crazy things, and I just run around and annoy everybody close to me in my city. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, let me tell you this thing about vampirism. Okay. Like, let me tell you about, so it's great fun for me. So, but we all have an easy mission. It's actually simple. And it's to follow that link over to Atheist Edge and hang out.
Go do it.
Done and done.
Right now. Go over there right now. I don't know why you're still here. Go over there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you all next time. I got to put up the outro.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Got to be professional about this. It'd be weird if we were still live right now, like talking about this.
Yeah, no, we are still live.
No, I know. I was teasing.